Hey y'all, I'm Kara Luton, and today I'll be talking about how I've changed careers not once, but 2 times. So I went from being a ballerina and pursuing that professionally to working as a music publicist in Nashville, Tennessee. Now I work as a software engineer on the UX team at CrowdStrike. We're a cybersecurity company aiming to stop breaches. It still makes me so proud to say that I'm a software engineer. And if you told me that's what I'd be doing a few years ago, I would have laughed. I had no idea what JavaScript was, or honestly, what even CSS or HTML were. I was completely oblivious to the tech industry, even though it was all around me. It's really funny to me now because I'm so immersed in the tech world. To give you a little more insight into what I do, besides working on an awesome product at CrowdStrike, I also write blogs on dev aimed towards beginners, and I help organize the Nashville Women Programmers Meetup group. My life now revolves around the tech industry, and I'm really proud of that. But I wouldn't be in this position in front of you and giving this talk if I hadn't pursued becoming a ballerina or working as a music publicist first. My life has really come full circle. I started out performing in front of an audience, and here I am years later in front of an audience again, but this time giving a tech talk. My past experiences make me the developer I am today. Those past experiences give me a perspective that no one else has. And if you come from a different career path, then you have that unique perspective as well. But I also want to say I'm not trying to put down anyone that's gone on a more traditional path and gotten a computer science degree. If I'm telling the truth, I'm kind of jealous of y'all. I wish I discovered coding earlier than I did, but I'll always be grateful for the path that led me here. Having a non-traditional background is an asset. And I want to open up everyone's eyes watching this talk and show you that. The next time you're sitting in an interview with someone who doesn't have a CS degree, I want you to think back to this talk and give them a chance. Because by opening the doors to people from non-traditional backgrounds, you're opening yourself to a more diverse, inclusive, and well-rounded team, one that'll improve your product even more. So here's the story of how I landed in tech. I grew up in Nashville doing ballet. I never took it very seriously until I was in high school, which is when I auditioned for the Louisville Ballet Summer Intensive program. And a summer intensive is basically a summer camp for ballet. I'm pretty sure I was late to the audition because I really didn't want to go, but somehow I got accepted. I went to their program for 3 weeks and I started taking ballet way more seriously afterwards. When I returned home from the summer intensive, I upped my dance classes to around 25 hours a week. I improved a lot over the next few months, and ballet became my life. So much that when I wasn't taking my own classes, I was an assistant teacher for some of the beginner level classes. The summer before my senior year of high school, I auditioned for the Joffrey Ballet School Summer Intensive. And during the audition, you could also audition for their year-round full-time trainee program, which is the first step in becoming a professional. I was accepted into both. I attended the summer program, but at first I didn't accept the traineeship. At most companies, you still have to pay for classes in order to be a trainee, and it was really too much money at the time. Plus, my family was moving to Chicago, so I decided to move with them. While I was in Chicago, I tried out various studios, but I never really found one that fit. I also had a hard time with adjusting to my new high school, so I ended up moving by myself at 17 to New York City to do the spring semester of the traineeship at Joffrey. I was dancing 5 to 6 days a week from 9 to 5. I had 2 technique classes a day, a partnering class, variations where you learn solos from different ballets, rehearsal time, and even a history of ballet class. And I did all of that while finishing my high school diploma online. When the end of the semester was coming to a close, I had to make a decision. I knew I wanted to go to college, but I had to decide if I wanted to major in ballet, which yes, is a real major, or go with something else. Throughout my time at Joffrey, I started constantly getting shin splints, and sometimes those would even turn into stress fractures. Ballet is really demanding physically. You're pushing your body to do things it's not supposed to do naturally, and there's obviously consequences to that. One injury can kill your career, so I decided I didn't want to pursue ballet anymore. It was a really hard decision for me. I was always known as the ballerina, and I felt like I was losing a part of who I was, but I knew it was time to move on. So I moved back home to Nashville and enrolled for my freshman year at Belmont University as a public relations major. I originally wanted nothing to do with the music industry, but naturally, Being at Belmont, which is a school known for the music business program, I was drawn to it. The music industry itself is just as competitive as trying to be an artist. There aren't a lot of music publicity firms and even fewer entry-level assistant jobs. I knew I needed to stand out from the crowd, so I started interning the summer after my freshman year. And I continued to intern each semester until I graduated. It all paid off when I got a job as a publicity assistant at a social media marketing agency in town shortly after graduating. A few months after landing that publicity assistant job, I was promoted to being a full publicist. I was living my dream. I was originally drawn to public relations because of Lauren Conrad and the show The Hills, if any of y'all remember that. She made the job look so glamorous, and it definitely was at times. I got to go to red carpets for free, or I got to go to concerts for free, hang out with celebrities and be on red carpets, but it was also really stressful. When I was at those concerts, I was always working, typically doing a social media takeover on behalf of a client or schmoozing with journalists until they could do an interview after the show. When I was at the red carpets, I'd be running ahead of my client on the carpet to talk to an outlet to see if they wanted to do an interview, while also trying to monitor the current interview my client was doing. When I wasn't at a concert or a red carpet, I was sending out emails to journalists to try to get more interviews or articles. I would send out hundreds of emails a day to journalists who would receive thousands of emails a day. It was a game of luck whether or not the journalists responded to me, and I really hated that aspect of my job. I didn't like that someone else opening an email and saying yes to working with my client determined if I was doing well or not in my boss's and my client's eyes. My anxiety was at an all-time high, and I absolutely dreaded going to work every single day. I knew I needed something new. I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I knew that I wanted something that was mentally challenging, but also allowed me to give back to other people. I toyed around with the idea of working in HR, or possibly even working in higher ed and admissions. I even reached out to a few people to start pursuing those ideas. But it was then when I stumbled upon Codecademy. I don't really remember how I found it, but I started teaching myself HTML and CSS. I loved the feeling of seeing something I created come to life in front of me. I did some Googling and realized that I could make a career out of coding. So I found as many people as I could and set up coffee meetings to talk about what it was like being a developer. I learned that it's a job where you're constantly learning, but that there's also an amazing community that's supportive and one you can give back to. After hearing that, I was hooked. I knew this was going to be my path. Now I had a new decision to make. How would I learn what I needed to in order to start this career? I'd only been graduated from Belmont for 2 years, and I knew that I didn't want to go back to school for another 4 to get a new degree, so that option was out. I also knew that because of going to online school while I was at Joffrey, that self-teaching wasn't really for me. So I started looking into boot camps. I found the Iron Yard and immediately enrolled in their front-end engineering program. I was really drawn to the small class size and that I could solely focus on front end, unlike some other programs I'd looked into. All of the staff that I met were super nice and welcoming, and I knew that it was the place for me. I had my last day of being a music publicist on Friday, September 23rd, 2016. And then I started my classes at the Iron Yard that following Monday. I opened my laptop on that first day and it all hit me. I had just quit a full-time job I worked really hard towards for something that may not work out. I barely knew anything about the tech industry or what I was getting myself into. Those 3 months at the Iron Yard were hard. I learned all about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It felt like a fire hose of information constantly coming at me. Before I felt like I could completely grasp one concept, we were already moving on to the next. But the more I learned, the more I fell in love with coding. Towards the end of the program, I started doing interviews and I started to notice a bit of a theme. After getting through 3 rounds during one interview, I was told that although I did better than most of the other candidates on the take-home test, that I was too green. And I ran into similar problems throughout my job search. I got judged a lot for being a bootcamp graduate. And when I would try to leverage the skills I learned from ballet in my previous PR role, I was told that they weren't relevant. Those rejections really got me down. I felt like I was always immediately being dismissed because I didn't have the experience they thought I should have for the role I was interviewing for. Thankfully, fast forward a bit, and I landed a job at an advertising agency where almost half the team were bootcamp grads and self-taught devs. I stayed there for almost 2 years before moving on to my current position at CrowdStrike, another place that was extremely accepting of my non-traditional background. It still baffles me that I was judged for my weird path to tech, because through interviewing, I realized that throughout my time being a ballerina and a music publicist, I was being taught these lessons that I had no idea would be useful in the tech world. Possibly the most surprising thing to me was how similar ballet and coding actually are. Becoming a professional ballerina takes a lot of practice. It looks easy, but that's only because the dancers want you to think that. Literally thousands of hours go into becoming a professional ballerina. Girls and boys often start training at 3 years old to become a professional in their late teens to early 20s. But even when a ballerina becomes a professional, it doesn't mean that they stop learning or trying to get better. And the same thing happens as developers. We put in a ton of time learning various languages and frameworks. Take JavaScript, for instance. As much as I wish it was true, you don't do a tutorial and then become an expert overnight. A lot of time is put into mastering what we do. And once you do become comfortable with JavaScript, it doesn't mean you're going to get it right every single time. Doing tutorials and coding challenges is how we as developers build our foundational knowledge and learn new things. And it's the same way with ballerinas. They start each day with a technique class going over basic to advanced moves. This is how both ballerinas and developers continue to learn and improve their skills over time. This was something that was really hard for me to grasp when I first made the transition to tech. I knew I was competing against people who had been coding for years. I wanted my code to be flawless the first time I wrote it, but that just doesn't happen. I loved ballet because I knew I'd always be making improvements. Now I've come to learn that fact with coding because I'll be doing the same. I'll always be learning and practicing, and that's amazing because that was always something I really enjoyed in ballet. Ballet also taught me to pay attention to the small details. Ballet is extremely meticulous. One of the basic moves in ballet is called a tendu. In French, it means to stretch. It may seem like a very simple move, but it's actually not. And even though I can't see you, I want you to stand up and try to do one with me. So you're going to start with your legs together and your hands on your hips. You want to make sure your abs are engaged while keeping your rib cage closed. Now you're going to rotate out your legs to first position. It's like a tiny little V with your heels together and your toes apart. Make sure your quads and your inner thighs are engaged and lifted. And then don't forget about also engaging your abs. Even just standing here like this is complicated. This is not something natural for your body to do. Next, you need to push into the floor with the ball of your foot and continue stretching your leg until your foot is fully pointed and your heel is turned out and lifted. It's really hard. There's a lot of small details, even in the most basic move in ballet. And y'all can sit down now. I won't torture you anymore. A more advanced move that starts with a tendu is called a renverse. When first learning to do ones, a lot of ballerinas make this mistake of not paying attention to starting out in the tendu, and they instead focus on getting their leg up and into that turn. But paying attention to the small details of the tendu, like activating every single one of your muscles, really pushing your foot into the floor and pointing through your whole foot, is what is giving you the power to do the renverse and execute it correctly. So how is this similar to coding? First of all, there have been dozens of times I've overlooked something as simple as a semicolon. Half an hour later, when my code isn't compiling, I'm sitting there laughing at myself because I finally realized what I've missed. And I do the same thing with ballet. Whenever I was struggling with a certain move, my teacher would make me take a step back and break it down piece by piece, similar to how you review smaller sections of code when it's not working. And a lot of the times with ballet or code, it's the small details that matter. And it's extra important when coding because those small details play into other decisions, like if you install that extra dependency or not. Those decisions affect the people that use our product. They can cause things like performance issues, and we need to take that into consideration. The small details make a difference in our day-to-day work, and paying attention to them can save both you and your customers minutes and sometimes even hours of frustration. Possibly one of the biggest things ballet taught me was how to get feedback and not take it personally. Both ballet and coding are extremely personal. In ballet, you're telling a story through your body. In coding, you're building something from scratch. There's no such thing as being perfect in ballet or in code. If I was in class or rehearsal and received no feedback, then that was wasted time because I wasn't learning how to improve. I feel the same way when I submit code for review. I want people to suggest how I could have done something differently or catch a mistake I may have missed. I crave that feedback because the person giving it is doing it because they want me to learn. And a majority of the time when someone makes a comment on my code, it's something I had never even thought about before. You can't grow without that feedback. That's how ballerinas develop their artistry and how we as engineers develop better code. I'm really amazed at all of the things that ballet taught me, but working in PR also taught me several things I use day to day as a developer. One thing I constantly use from PR are my writing skills. Whether it was writing emails or a press release, I was constantly writing. And when I was doing so, I was extremely particular, not only about the words I was using, but how concise I was being. Selecting the right word to perfectly convey my message and keeping everything short and sweet in the email could mean the difference between getting the placement for my artist or not. Not only does that help me as someone who enjoys writing blog posts for other developers and as a speaker, but it helps me when working as well. As developers, our day isn't just spent exclusively writing code. We're commenting that code, explaining to others why we chose to do something a particular way, or even writing documentation. Being concise and clear doing those not only helps yourself when you come back to something you've worked on, but it helps anyone interacting with what you've done as well. PR also taught me how to work as a team. There's a stigma that people who become developers do so because you don't want to work with others, but I probably work with people more so than I did when I was in PR. When I was a publicist, I worked with managers, record labels, and marketing teams. We'd all work together to put together a vision for the artist and execute it. As developers, we do the same. We work with managers, designers, writers, researchers, and other developers. Not a day goes by that I'm not reaching out to someone else on the team, whether that's something like a question for a developer or for a designer, or pairing with another developer. As devs, we're interacting with so many different people across so many different teams. It's vital to have those strong team working skills. And that's something that, in my opinion, really makes the difference between a good and a bad developer. Working as a publicist didn't only teach me things that I use now that I work as a developer, but it also taught me two really important things that were useful when I was interviewing. The first is that although I hated sending those hundreds of emails a day to journalists, it taught me how to stand out amongst a crowd. All journalists receive a ton of emails a day from publicists vying for their attention. It made me become creative with not only my pitches, but even my subject lines of my emails. Something as simple as including hello and the journalist's name was enough to give me some extra views that I wasn't getting before. So I took what I learned and applied it when I was first job searching. There are a lot of developer roles out there, but there are also a lot of people applying for the same role. I wanted to make sure that my application was unique when I was applying for jobs, so I created a custom email template that I'd send along with my resume. It was not fancy at all. It just included some highlights about me and the projects from my bootcamp. I even added the company's logo and did the entire thing in their brand colors. It was not the most advanced thing, but it was enough to make me stand out. And when I would ask why they chose to interview me from a stack of applicants, I would usually hear that it was because of that custom email. The second is that PR taught me great interview skills. A big part of my job as a publicist was teaching my clients how to do an interview. I'd help them practice the questions they typically get, what to say when they didn't know an answer, and how to weave their personal story into the interview. Developers are often most concerned with the technical interview, which obviously is a big part of the process. But in order to get there, you have to pass that initial getting to know you interview first. I took what I teach my clients and I applied that to myself. I thought about the common questions I'd be asked and knew I'd always be questioned about my career transition. So now when I am asked to tell the interviewer a little bit more about myself, which is usually the first question, I talk about why I decided to make the switch. Then throughout the rest of my interview, I talk about the things I learned from being a ballerina and a publicist and how that helps me as a developer. I tell a story in my interview, much like how I train my clients to do. One of the biggest takeaways I have from both ballet and PR is that community is important. I didn't have a community in either of my past careers. Ballet is extremely competitive. There are only so many spots at a company and then only so many roles. There are even some ballet companies where you have to compete for what level you'll be within the company each year. And PR is the same way. Each publicist is fighting to get their clients placements online and on TV. Besides the people I worked with, I didn't really have anyone else doing the same thing as me to turn to and ask a question. I was amazed when I was at my boot camp, seeing how supportive our community is through things like Twitter chats, Slack groups, meetups, and conferences. It's part of the reason why I wanted to be a co-organizer for Nashville Women Programmers. When I was a publicist, I had to plan a lot of events. I did ice cream socials, invited journalists to music video shoots, and even once went bar hopping in a limo to promote an artist's new song. It was a tough job. I really like throwing events, so now I apply those skills to our Nashville Women Programmers meetups. Through that, I'm able to show others how amazing of a community we have. Honestly, I could probably go on for an hour about what ballet and PR have taught me. There are so many more things than what I've just talked about. But my story is just one of a few people who work in tech now that previously came from a non-traditional background. In fact, according to the 2020 Stack Overflow Developer Survey, 38.1% of people working in tech who have a college degree did not major in computer science. There are more people in tech who come from that non-traditional background than ever before. And with the popularity of boot camps and people wanting to make the switch to tech, that number is only going to continue to grow. My Aunt Denise is one of those people who made the switch to tech, and I'm so proud of her. She left her job as an insurance underwriter to attend Northwestern University's Full Stack Bootcamp, and she's now working as a developer in Chicago who focuses on accessibility. Amanda taught herself to code while working in an outdoor recreation and customer service industries. Now she works as a developer at Lewis Communications in Nashville. Another amazing story is Ezekiel. I was introduced to him through the Code Newbie weekly Twitter chat, and I'm fascinated about his story of how he landed in tech. After studying in Israel, he became a rabbi and then attended a boot camp at the Flatiron School. Now he works as a software engineer in New York and blogs about tech on his site, Rabbi on Rails. These are just a few of the amazing stories of people who made this switch to tech. I posted on Dev asking for more stories and received so many responses. People who transition from being social media managers, teachers, translators, architects, musicians, aircraft maintenance engineers, and more. We've heard time and time again that coding is the future. There are so many job opportunities in this field, and that isn't stopping anytime soon. We need more candidates. So why do we have this mentality that people who don't have a computer science degree don't belong? By saying that, you're rejecting people like Ezekiel, my Aunt Denise, Amanda, myself, and so many other amazing people who only add to your team. So what can we do to make a hiring process more inclusive to those who have non-traditional backgrounds? Doing something as simple as removing the requirement of having a computer science degree in your job position will attract even more applicants. There's been quite a few times when I haven't applied to a job because the CS degree was a requirement. Then during your interviews, assess candidates for their potential. We downplay having strong soft skills in tech, but we shouldn't be. Those soft skills are things like problem solving, initiative to learn, and mentoring others, and they are transferable. Don't put as much emphasis on a candidate's potential, but instead take a look at those transferable skills. Your tech stack can always be taught, but those are the skills that are tougher to learn, and in my opinion are what makes a really good candidate become a great candidate. And if you're on the other end of the spectrum and searching for a job when you don't have a CS degree, take a step back and look at what you've done in the past. Do what I've done in this talk. See where you can pull similarities from your past experiences and use those to your advantage. Weave those things you've learned into your interviews to show how much of an asset you can be, and prove that even though you may be new to tech now, that one day you'll be that company's senior engineer. So, as a former ballerina turned music publicist turned software engineer, if I can find similarities between those three radically different careers, then anyone can. Those past experiences give me the strength in my career as a developer and shouldn't be treated as if they don't. Thank you so much.